who had been victimized even sexually and abused during the attacks and raids of the different adinams across and different kailasas across India and even in the US. So during these raids and in the previous segments, we have seen the footage, we have seen how these raids had happened and what kind of brutal force with which the people had jumped over the gates, they had thrown, literally stoning the sannyasis, grabbing the women sannyasis and assaulting them while it was being broadcasted to national television. And we saw this footage, and we saw literally how so many women sannyasis were being victimized and assaulted in order to, and obviously, having seen even the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism undergo so much, and then see that he was taking up this intense penance after 53 days of torture.
Imagine our viewers who don't actually know what Panchatapas is, can you explain exactly what the process of Panchatapas is and what the context of the Panchatapas was?
Yes, of course. Actually, so Panchatapas is a sacred Hindu ritual and a Hindu form of penance where in a circle of fire, or in a circle of fire, as well as even traditionally in many of the very authentic traditions, they even put a pot of fire on top of the head, and then they'll also stare directly at the sun. So with fire in all of the directions, you have to focus inward and experience oneness with all things in this like intense penance. So with this context and with this in this very intense penance, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism took up doing the Panchatapas, and Pancha in Hinduism means 5. So in all 5 directions, all around you as well as up and down and everywhere, we had the different forms of heat literally like surrounding you. And in this practice, even the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism says that he has been practicing it even as he was 17, 18, 19 years old, when he was in a spiritual wandering, and before he had founded even the revival of Kailasa.
And of course, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is already centered on the Supreme Consciousness. That is the state that the avatar is already in, and is not performing this Panchatapas to experience that state, but rather to heal humanity of the crimes against the karma that they incurred against such a huge persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and Kailasa. So the tapas in this context was performed rather for the healing of humanity and the healing of many of the sannyasis and adinavasis who had to suffer through this horrible attack in 2010.
Yes, and for normal human beings, it would be to experience ultimate and to experience oneness. It is intense tapas, but for an incarnation, someone incarnation who has literally taken up the responsibility to bring superconscious breakthrough to the entire humanity. This was an immense act of sacrifice and an act to heal the entire humanity. And especially even the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism said that it was for even the victims to heal from the trauma of being victimized, being assaulted during so many of the attacks against the Adinams and against them. And during this time, however, we saw exactly this extremely strong, intense penance that had so much of deep sentiment and was extremely significant for all of us Kailasians and of course the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism himself, how the media had twisted the the very ritual itself, and then ensued the criminalization of this entire practice. And they're trying, first of all, what they claimed was entirely baseless, and it was not. It was projecting the entire ritual as if it was a crime. And what they had tried to say was that there was a use of kerosene during in the Panchatapas, which was not true at all. But suddenly you're seeing in the every single media outlet that this was happening, and even a false case without any evidence suddenly being allowed to be filed against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And this is just days after, um, after having been released from this illegal
legal imprisonment
that he had gone through.
Yes. And actually, the to give a little bit more details about the vilification of this, rather than focusing on the deep compassion and service that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was providing to humanity at that time through this practice of Panchatapas, the media chose to focus on a completely arbitrary, made-up case where they claimed that the Adina and Kailasa, Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, were actually stealing kerosene from the poor, and that we were somehow illegally obtaining this kerosene and for this Panchatapas, despite this absolutely not being the case. And rather than focusing on what was actually the significance of what was happening at that time, they chose to focus on something so minute and completely wrong, and trying to make a case out of something that was completely untrue, first of all, and completely missing the context and point of and purpose of what the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was doing, just to draw attention away from the service that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was providing to humanity at that time through the Panchatapas, and rather trying to again portray the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism as a criminal and as someone to be either scared of or to be angry with. And this is exactly the tactic used every single time by the media and various anti-Hindu elements and neo-Hindutva elements who are trying to stop the work of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and his service to humanity.
And we saw how, what I think I'd like to add also, that the how Panchatapas, for millions across the world, having to see the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism undergo 53 days in illegal imprisonment and undergo the worst types of torture, and in the media barely even being able to see like the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, and continuously for 53 days not knowing what was happening. Is he safe? Is he okay? Actually, for the global Hindu diaspora, whom the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism had touched millions of lives, had enriched and transformed millions of lives, the truth was that this Panchatapas was a strong statement of solidarity, of being strong and standing for what is right, and also healing and standing for the Hindu principles in even in the most brutal of attacks. It was such a strength for all of us Kailashians. However, what the media did was to mock and ultimately use this again to strategize against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. That was on one side, and I'd like to just point out again also that there are so many people, the anti-Hindu militant forces themselves, who had tried to allege that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was somehow hurting the religious sentiments of people with his with the allegations that they had framed and they had made up entirely, fabricated against him. And but on the other side, what they were doing was exactly that. They were the ones hurting our religious sentiments. They were the ones absolutely throwing our sentiments to the dogs and just not even giving 1 ounce of respect or human dignity to our religious sentiments. And they continue to do this again and again. And not only was it the media, but also so many different anti-Hindu elements worked to um, who had worked to even stop the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and all of us from stopping the doing the Hindu rituals and doing our personal practice. For example, in 2010, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism had to be confiscated his own japamala, and japamala is just a sacred mala or a sacred rosary bead, we can say, in Sanatana Hindu Dharma, and it is made of Rudraksha, which is a sacred bead from Hinduism, and which is well honored and respected in the Shaivite tradition. And this Japamala, they took it away, and they had decided that they would not return it back even after having requested it. And of course, this is the worst kind of crime done against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And what religious leader would need to go through this at the hands of terrorist forces? Have we ever heard of any kind of religious leader being denied of their fundamental rights? And when the Rudrakshamala of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism himself is confiscated, and then literally on the media, how they had tried to say, oh, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is trying to ask for his japamala, and all these kinds of statements they were making in the media, trying to make fun and mock the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, again, for wanting to practice the Hindu rituals and the Hindu traditions as well. In this case, this is one of the worst crimes done, not just against one being, but against Hinduism entirely. We wouldn't see this against any other religious leader. We wouldn't see this against any other religion itself. When we do crimes to take away the religious and stop the religious rights of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism himself, this is an outright blatant statement they're making against Hindus and in the global Hindu diaspora and Hinduism in all of its history as well. And that is the worst crime that it has not even come out yet, has not even been told to the world. And not only that, I wanted to also share that even when the mala, the Rudraksha mala, was taken away, was confiscated from the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, that did not stop him from literally continuing to do his own personal practice. Even we heard after many years, actually, one of the sannyasis who would go to the prison where the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was held was to offer food and to offer the basics, which they were not providing. We heard how the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism had actually torn off a strip of his kavi cloth, of his own kavi cloth, and had tied beads in that cloth and tied the knots in that cloth. And he started to do japa with just that. And this is one of the most touching, most real, I can say, ideas.
You can just understand the sincere commitment that Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has towards the practices and traditions that he himself teaches to the world. He himself lives that. It is the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's very being, his very essence, are these practices and rituals that he has shared and brought and revived in the world today. It's his very being. That's why even when he was forced to take away, they forced him to take away the mala and his japa mala and forced him to stop doing puja. That did not stop him from performing the rituals that he was so dedicated to, is so dedicated to. He actually tore off his own cloth, which was and made knots in it to be able to perform his rituals and continue the practices that he has been committed to from his very birth itself.
And I can say a strong statement to all of us Kailasians on the power of the Hindu principles, because how the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism literally stood on behalf and for all of us to and stood as an example foremost, and stood also to ensure that the revival of Kailasa does happen. I can say is the most inspiring, and there's no words to describe it really, how in the face of the anti-Hindu militant forces directly, who are literally torturing and literally who had the intention entirely to eliminate him and to kill him, he stood strongly with the principles of non-violence and the principles of the Hindu practices and traditions. And even in 2012, we saw also further how how even state-sponsored elements had tried to bar even us Adinavasis from conducting puja and from congregating and doing our religious practices in our congregations. And what we are doing is not any criminal activity there. We're just doing puja together. It is routine, and it is a spiritual practice for all of us in the temple ecosystem to come together and offer our deepest love and gratitude through the form of puja to the deities and our guru. However, in 2012, when the CM of Karnataka had ordered the seize of the Adi Kailasha Sarvanapeetham, and the Adinam was subsequently sealed entirely, the state-sponsored elements were continuously on guard. And in the Adinam, police were scouting the entire Adinam at all times. They were in different places and ensuring that we were not even doing puja. And even we have heard the stories and the recollections of so many Gurukul children as well as the Adinavasis during that time who would say we would do the puja in secret. And because obviously we would not stop doing the puja and we would not stop doing these great our basic rights as Hindus and what we took up as our lifestyle. But they had to do it entirely in secret. They had to make sure that nobody was away. They had to make sure nobody was watching, and they had to do it entirely secretly. The Hindu ritual, the sacred acts of puja are not a crime, but they were just making it as if it was a criminal activity that we're doing, as if we're going off and doing drugs or something like that. It was just a blatant criminalization of our puja practice and the Hindu rituals and practices.
Yes, Ma. And even in 2012, in Madurai, when the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was coronated as the Guru Mahasannidhanam of Madurai Adinam, the media portrayed that the tirtha that was offered, the sacred water that was offered within the Adinam, was filled with drugs, and that we were actually attempting to drug our devotees and disciples who were there for the celebration, and many other practices like this that were presented as something completely misportrayed and presented as something completely illegal and immoral, such as the tirtha having drugs, whereas many times, and many of they portrayed that the women in the Adinam were walking around without, were walking around topless, and many other misportrayals and complete lies, blatant lies actually, that just to portray a negative image and character assassinate the Supreme Pontificate of Hinduism, vilified the sacred practices that the Supreme Pontificate of Hinduism has been promoting and reviving for the past 26 years. And these are just some of the tactics used by the media and other anti-Hindu elements to vilify the Supreme Pontificate of Hinduism and Kailasa, to portray negatively and affect the public image of the community, the Hindu community that the Supreme Pontificate of Hinduism has been building for the past almost nearly 3 decades.
Right, and I'd also like to bring up the example of, and even in right now, what is happening against Hindus. I think in 2014 or 2016, we had the Hindu PETA, which is a very large organization for the protection of animals, but in many places around the world. However, in India, there are several of the acts that they had pursued and even gotten government sanction against, for banning these acts or for banning certain rituals of Sanatana Hindu Dharma without any base of how these rituals are actually performed, and by essentially vilifying these rituals. So, for example, the primary example I have is the Jallikattu ritual, which is a Hindu ritual which is entirely vilified by anti-Hindu narratives, and they, in the media as well as in popular culture, in different ways.
For those of the viewers who may not know what Jallikattu is, can you explain a little bit and elaborate what exactly this ritual is and where it's performed usually?
Yes, so Jallikattu is a ritual which is performed often around Pongal time in South India, in Tamil Nadu, and it is a ritual that is done in the temple premises in the Hindu temples, as well as in the local temples as well. And in this, there is the there is the involvement of the sacred, one of the sacred bulls, which is actually worship. And in this, first of all, I should say it is not any kind of bullfighting or animal abuse. In this, the bull is actually worshipped and never do in the ritualistic practice, or the bulls or any of the animals ever drugged or used or having any kind of I can say steroids or any kind of medicinal or unnatural supplements put on them. So in this practice, which is a very traditional kind of role which happens, or one of the people is basically trying to touch the I can say the back of the bull, and it is so in this practice, what the anti-Hindu forces were trying to put as the narrative, where that this was an abuse against the bulls, and this was, and oftentimes the bulls were treated violently and were treated or were given drugs, and all these kinds of allegations were made. However, on a large scale, how the practice was going on and how the ritual was happening was entirely different from how the anti-Hindus had portrayed it. And unfortunately, what happened is that what happened in some of the abusive or some of the which were some of the trials of Jallikattu, which was not actually the authentic ritual. So there are some people who were trying to do something somewhere else unassociated with Hinduism that got projected as the entire Hindu ritual itself. And unfortunately, what we saw then is the entire banning of this ritual happening in all Hindu temples and in the state of Tamil Nadu. So in this way,
and actually, one moment, I just want to clarify, there is actually a strong significance, both culturally and spiritually, of doing this ritual, where the ritual is actually performed for one, to identify actually the strongest bull, the most viable bull, to continue the lineage of the rest of the bulls, to make sure that the next the offspring of the bulls are getting the best DNA. Basically, the whole practice is to select out the best DNA of all the bulls. And so this is actually very significant for many communities, to make sure that the animal that they choose is the strongest and most viable for their livelihood, and whatever practices that they use the bull for, the animal for. And also, it's a sacred ritual where we actually it's a ritual offered in many temples, like Venkateshwara temples and Devi temples, and at no point is the bull intentionally harmed in any way, nor is, if the bull does end up getting harmed or naturally passing in this process, the bull is offered a very sacred burial and not at all consumed in any way. This is not there's no intention of hurting the animal in any way. It is just a very significant practice for the communities, especially the traditional agricultural communities who use these animals for their agricultural work.
And so, unfortunately, we saw how the Jallikattu was entirely banned in one entire state. And like this, so many other rituals banned and vilified by the anti-Hindu militant forces, who are literally spread out in the media, in so many different institutions in India itself. Now, today we see so many different rituals that are entirely banned. If we can even talk about fire walking. We can talk about so many different rich Hindu rituals, which cannot even see the daylight because of how vilified they are. But they still hold extremely strong sacred Hindu sentiment. And today we only went over a few of the examples. But from these examples, we can strongly support how much Kailasa, a nation, a sovereign nation, where with the conscious sovereignty of all beings in mind, and with that as the context, these sacred Hindu rituals should be practiced and revived. And that ultimately is what the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is doing through Kailasa, and is the last hope for Hinduism. So that brings us to a conclusion of this segment of the persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, and the series that is ongoing during the Hindu Persecution Awareness Month. So I request all the viewers who are watching right now, you can take a few minutes to go to the link below and explore the we explored the UN report, or the report where the UN has recognized the persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And please share that with all of your friends, your family, everyone whom you think needs to know now.
It's due to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's tireless hard work that the UN has even recognized the persecution, the ongoing persecution of Hindus and Kailasa and the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And what this is just a small recognition of what all Hindus have faced over the past several hundred years. And due to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's hard work and intense sincerity for reviving Hinduism, this is now coming to light in the public eye. So because of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's hard work, now we are able to at least speak about this persecution, this ongoing persecution against Hindus and Kailasa. So please do take a moment to read about the ongoing persecution and share it with all of your family and friends.
And of course, let us take the responsibility now to ensure that this is shared, and the untold story of the Hindu Holocaust and the persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is known to the world. Ultimately, the need for Kailasa, the Hindu civilizational nation, is understood and recognized in the world. With this, we will now be concluding this segment and we'll end with the Purna Mantra. Thank you so much for joining us. Nithyanandam. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Tat. Sarvam Bhagavat Sri Shiva Padukarpanamastu. Om Nithyananda.
Nityananda Paramashivoham. Om 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 Nityananda Paramashivoham.